Morning. Well, as always, we are just under an hour until Prime Minister's Questions. It is the last of 2018 before Parliament breaks up for Christmas holidays. And ahead of that, I'm joined by three MPs to discuss the major political stories of the day. I can't think what might be on the agenda. Let me welcome then from the Conservatives, Ben Bradley, from Labour, Stephen Kinnock, and from the Liberal Democrats, Vera Hobhouse. Thank you very much for joining me today. I may have to start with the B word, Brexit. But with a slightly different question. It's the question we've been asking all our listeners this morning. At this time, some people would say national crisis. We don't have an agreed departure plan from the European Union. 100 days to go until Brexit. Is it right MPs should get more than 2 weeks off, certainly away from the debating chamber, for Christmas? Ben Bradley from Conservatives, what would you say?
Oh, look, it's not by our choice of anybody in this room. I think we were all disappointed when the vote was delayed last week. We'd like to have had it done and dusted. So, I do think certainly my staff and the guys in my office who work very hard should have a bit of time. I'm certainly looking forward to spending time with my kids, but I'm sure we'd all much rather be getting on with it, actually.
Well, the Speaker, John Bercow, has said it would be possible to shorten the break. Would you be happy to come back on the 2nd of January instead of the 7th?
I'm happy to. If we need to get it done, time is short.
If we need to get it done. I mean, I feel like there's a sense of, yes, we possibly do need to get something done, do we not?
And if that's the case, I think it might be sensible if we need that time in the chamber to get that done.
I mean, Stephen, let me come to you. People getting in touch saying, well, I'm working all over Christmas, and this is not to deny, and we have made this point. I had Claire Perry on earlier making this point that when you go back to constituencies, you are still obviously working, taking soundings from people who voted for you, and also trying to deal with local problems. And in her case, she was saying she had ministerial work. But that said, there is this very strong feeling of concern about what's about to happen. Do you think there should be not as long a break? What do you make of that?
I would be up for working every hour of the day to get this sorted, because I feel that the country is in a state of limbo. We're just paralysed by the incompetence and shambolic nature of the government. The withdrawing of the 11th of December vote was the most anti-democratic thing that any British government and minister and Prime Minister has done in living memory, I would say. So we need to restore faith in our democracy. She's going to listen
to what the problems were, though, and this is something that she's criticised for a lot, Mrs May, and she's coming back on the week of the 14th of January to try and at least put something through that deals with some of those concerns, you could say.
But she could have done that on the 11th of December. Instead, she went off on a wild goose chase around Europe to try and get them to change something they've made absolutely clear they're not going to change. It's become about her, actually. That's what I think is really troubling about all of this. It's become Mrs May versus Parliament, and I think that is deeply wrong.
Before we get into Brexit a little bit more, Vera, would you come back earlier?
I absolutely think it is a crisis, and we should respond and try and solve this as soon as possible. It was deeply irresponsible to delay the vote, because we could have moved on from there now already. And to be quite honest, even in this 2 weeks of break, there will be plotting, there will be talking. It's not that this Brexit issue is going to go away for 2 weeks. So absolutely, I think we should make everything possible and come back as soon as possible to resolve it. And we need to resolve it beyond a crisis.
You would have voted against the deal, Vera, is that correct?
I would, because...
And sorry, let me just quickly go around. We always like to know how everyone's going to vote. Stephen, would you have voted against it?
Yes, it's a truckload of fudge.
And Ben Bradley from the Conservatives, would you have voted against it?
I would have voted against it, yeah.
Yeah, so I keep having, at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday, panels of all politicians of all stripes, and you all would have voted against it. So you could argue perhaps even having the vote may have been a waste of time. But let's keep going with this. Ben Bradley, how would you describe it in terms of what's your feeling about leaving without a deal? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I don't think it's anything like the crisis that people are painting it as. You see all sorts of different variations on predictions, and it seems that often the ones that are taken forward by media, by politicians, are the kind of worst case scenario, nightmare, unlikely to happen.
Really? So why are businesses coming together this morning saying they're watching in horror as the Prime Minister plans for no-deal Brexit and accuses politicians for wasting a lot of time?
Some businesses have been saying that since day one. Other businesses have welcomed it with open arms. I think for a lot of...
We've welcomed no deal with open arms, have they?
There are a number. I talked to some businesses in my constituency who quite frankly want the whole thing over, and if that means leaving on the 29th of March and they have the certainty that that's the case, they'd rather deal with that and move on. But there's very important...
Could you give us some examples? Can you name some of them?
Well, you took Tim Martin from Wetherspoons is one example who wants us to get it done and dusted. But
there's get it done and get it dusted, and there's leaving without a deal.
This is what I was about to say. This is what I was about to say. So it's very important that we make the distinction between realising on the 28th of March that, oh God, we haven't come up with something, and tomorrow we're leaving.
Your government hasn't.
Quite, and I'm, one of the more vocal critics of that. But there is a big difference between that and a situation where we realise now that we're going to be leaving on the 29th of March, where we can go back to Europe recognising that and try to agree as much as we possibly can outside of the customs arena. And we might even be in a position where we can negotiate that extra time, that transition.
I'm going to bring everyone else in just a moment, but why do you sound so calm? Put business aside for a moment, about somebody like a group like the Healthcare Distributors Association told MPs last month no deal could have catastrophic consequences for the supply of drugs, and the public may have to stockpile medicines. Nothing to do with business, nothing to do with profit per se. When the public are hit potentially by some of the potential ramifications of no deal, are you just going to be sat there saying, look, we're in a better situation now?
There's lots of potential all sorts, but actually if we are prepared for it, that's the important thing. So
I just asked your business minister how much money the business department have been given from this 1.5 billion pot to plan for Brexit and in the event of no deal. She didn't know. I asked her what was in the information packs going out to businesses on Friday, 100 pages long. She didn't know. All I'm trying to say to you is, you may say it's all about planning, but when people within your own government ministries don't know these details, it hardly inspires confidence.
I can't answer for Claire. On the particular NHS question, you've seen Matt Hancock over the weekend talking about the preparations that he's made and that he feels the NHS is prepared for that. We've also signed up to the kind of ongoing transit arrangements in terms of customs that will allow us to skip some of that bureaucracy on the borders to get things through. And there's no reason at all why you couldn't prioritise medicines in particular coming into the UK.
So you'll sleep well at night with all of those plans?
We had, Millennium Bug was going to be a zombie apocalypse. Leaving the EU was going to immediately crash our economy. None of that happened.
There are
all worst case scenarios.
There's eyebrows being raised. There's grumblings happening. Let's bring in the other members of the panel. Stephen Kinnock.
Well, look, I sit on the Brexit Select Committee,
yes,
and we've taken hours and hours of evidence from every Whitehall department, from every sector of the economy. And one thing they've all been absolutely clear on is that no deal is a catastrophe for British government and for the British economy. So I think we just have to accept that is the reality.
Well, Ben Brantley has painted his case why. So he's had the mic, you're having the mic.
Sure. The reason that we need to vote against the deal is because I can see why businesses want the transition period. They just want us to support May's deal because it delivers the transition period. All that will do is kick the can down the road, because the political declaration is so vague and waffly and meaningless that it's not going to deliver anything like the certainty that business needs. And all that will happen is the cliff edge will come in December 2020, when we've got even less leverage because we will not have done the withdrawal agreement. So do you think Jeremy Corbyn
could get a better deal?
Well, I've been banging on for 2 years about the Norway option. I genuinely believe it delivers the certainty that we need.
He's not been banging on about it, though, has he?
Well, I can't answer for Jeremy.
But you are a member of the Labour Party, and many people are listening who are Labour voters are trying to understand, if it's not this deal, what is the deal to leave?
I genuinely believe that if we could pivot to a Norway Plus deal, which gives us single market, gives us customs union, sorts out the backstop.
But no restriction on migration.
Provides restrictions on immigration through Articles 112 and 113 of the EEA agreement.
Those articles he has read and we have not, but go on.
Safeguard measures. 112 is the emergency brake.
Right.
We then negotiate a long-term deal based on 113. It is, of course, something we would do as a sovereign national parliament. There are risks with it, but it's there in the treaty in black and white.
As you say, for 2 years you've been trying to advance this deal. May I suggest, though, we can talk about that a little, but we also have to look at where we are and what is actually possible at this point. So may I ask you a slightly different question, which is, Jeremy Corbyn has been criticised, and Vera from Lib Dems, I will bring you in just a moment, it's a very specific question to you on this. Jeremy Corbyn's been criticised for his approach this week. Some say an open goal, the government right now. Theresa May, how she's behaving, as you just said, how she doesn't seem to have the confidence of the chamber in any way, and lots of people on her side, including Ben. He did call for a vote of no confidence in Theresa May, but stopped short of calling for a vote of no confidence in the entire government. Was he wrong?
I think we should have gone straight away, as soon as she pulled that vote, to a motion of no confidence in the government, because I think it's the constitutional duty, whatever the parliamentary arithmetic, whatever the politics we play with this, it's a constitutional duty of Her Majesty's loyal opposition to say very clearly that we have an utterly incompetent, shambolic government that's no longer capable of running the country. They're in office
why didn't he do
and not
it?
in power. There seem to be some concerns about going through the gears in terms of our position on if we have the motion of no confidence, we can't get a general election. We then go to other options, including a second referendum. There are deep reservations in the Parliamentary Labour Party about a second referendum. I want to go through the motion of no confidence because I want us to pivot to the Norway Plus option. I think it has a cross-party majority. We have a very good group, cross-party, myself and Nick Bowles working on this. I think when you see in that room colleagues from all parts of the chamber working together, I think the public, if it were a fly on the wall, would say that's what we want our MPs to be doing, finding a pragmatic, sensible, bridge-building way out of this mess.
Let's get Vera in on this, because the Lib Dems, along with the SNP, have tabled a formal no confidence bid in the government. But without Labour supporting this, because it all comes down to arithmetic, and even with Labour support, it would actually be unlikely to succeed at this point, the arithmetic as it stands. Aren't you guilty of wasting time and playing politics when we come
need
back?
to move something forward. We've just established that we are in a crisis. We didn't have the vote, which would have allowed us to move something forward. We need to move something forward. If we had an effective opposition, I am sure we would have moved forward. Unfortunately, and Stephen is a very good colleague on the Brexit Select Committee, but he is at odds with his own leadership. And it's the Labour leadership that is currently blocking us from moving forward. And it's really irresponsible for keeping the clock ticking and not moving forward. So it is very unfortunate that Jeremy Corbyn cannot come behind either a no confidence vote or a second referendum, a people's vote, which is how we call it, a referendum on the final deal, because now we have got real clarity of what Brexit would actually look like, which is why
but
a referendum
it's not going to get through yours, is it?
I believe actually that there is a majority. I believe there is a majority for the people's vote, because it is ultimately the most democratic thing that we can do in this situation.
Sorry, that's slightly different to what I've just asked. It's about a vote of no confidence in the government. You aren't going to get that through.
Well, we need
as you currently stand. I mean, that's fact.
We need the Labour to come behind us. We haven't heard what the DUP would be doing, because obviously the Conservative Party depends on the DUP
well,
vote.
They have said quite clearly. I spoke to Sammy Woodhouse from the DUP the other day, their Brexit spokesman, that they will not go against Theresa May or the government at the moment.
I think we have to look at all the options that are possible for us to move this impasse forward, and I would like to see it on the table, actually.
Okay, so you're hoping Labour will join you? That's the hope.
We are pushing and pushing for the Labour front bench to come on board, and we hope. Yep.
Okay. Ben Bradley, if everyone was to come on board with this motion, and we'll come off motions and parliamentary business in just a moment, but it is important because people are saying what's next if Theresa May doesn't get her deal through. Would you vote with Labour and the rest of the chamber if they went?
Absolutely not. The alternative to government at the minute, difficult as it may be, and the challenges that we're obviously facing and divisions, actually the prospect of a Jeremy Corbyn-led government is certainly something that would put fear into the heart of business across the country, and I doubt even Stephen could disagree with that. I think
it might not put fear into their hearts if Jeremy Corbyn could go back and get a different deal.
Jeremy Corbyn doesn't even want to. I don't know what Jeremy Corbyn's policy is.
He's not here, but I'll attempt to say something for him, and I'm not asking Stephen to necessarily do that, because, as you say, you are at odds sometimes with Mr Corbyn. But there is a situation where it has been stated that they believe they could get a better deal. They could get something that would pass
Jeremy
Parliament.
Corbyn's policy is he wants a general election.
No, my point to you is this, that you say businesses. One minute you say it's not okay for businesses to be frightened by no deal, and the next minute they'd be terrified by Jeremy Corbyn. They might not be terrified if Jeremy Corbyn got into a transition agreement or part of that time.
There's no reason
where they
we can't
could
go
feel more
forward with the
comfortable.
transition agreement. So actually, like I said before, there's a clear difference between leaving and realising at the last minute we're not going to get an agreement and planning properly for that and managing it, going back to the EU and saying, let's agree everything we can agree, let's talk about the things that are mutually beneficial. We can't deal with customs at this point.
She's not got anything, has she?
But actually, there's no reason.
She has. Stephen put it in a slightly less respectful way, but she had gone around Europe trying to get things. We saw various videos of her attempting things, telling people off, accusing Juncker of saying nebulous, all this. She didn't get anything, did she?
I don't think that she's going to get the movement on the deal that is going to convince me
So why on
and
earth
many
should
other
you
colleagues.
stay in power? Why on earth should Theresa May stay in power?
Because that's not the end of the game, is it? The reality is that what is going to affect the Brexit outcome is what she chooses to do after that, when this deal fails. And that's why the delay was frustrating, because I think we need to move on and deal with what happens when it goes down, because it is going to go down. That actually, how do you then manage this proposal? If you can go back to the European Union...
It might not go down, though.
I think it will. But if you go back to the European Union and you can put in place as many agreements as you can on as broad a range of subjects as you can, including your citizens' rights, your security, all that kind of stuff. And the EU have even said themselves that they are willing to consider a kind of 9-month period of frozen customs practices while we agree a free trade deal. But actually, you're in a much stronger position to agree that customs arrangement when we're outside of the EU after the 29th of March.
Vera, you're chomping at the bit.
I believe that Ben has not moved on from the Brexit fantasies that have been played out to the British public for 2.5 years now. Clearly, a no-deal Brexit would be a disaster. I'm totally on board with the line that Stephen has taken. It's catastrophic. Businesses are warning us. Organizations are warning us. We cannot, in all good faith, vote for or stand behind or let a no-deal Brexit happen. There is no majority for a no-deal Brexit in Parliament, nor is there a majority in the people, which is why
Theresa May's plan
indeed,
either.
which is why we need to go back to the people. We need to go back to the people.
All talking at the same time. There is a majority to talk. Can we move on then slightly? And it is obviously very much connected to the new immigration rules, the proposed new immigration rules from the government. Been highly delayed. Lots of delays. Lots of things coming in just before Christmas, you may notice. The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, has said plans will not include a specific target for reducing the numbers coming into the UK, but the objective is to bring down net migration to more, quote, sustainable levels. Ben Bradley, what is a sustainable level in English, in a number?
Well, I think I've always thought it was wrong to put caps and limits on these things. I don't think even people in constituencies like mine who voted sometimes on the basis of troubles with immigration and how that's affected communities, I still don't think...
For Mansfield,
I still don't think that was about numbers. I think that was about control.
So Theresa May is wrong to have these sorts of targets. She seems to be wedded. Well,
sustainable is good, and I think we're broadly welcome to see a reduction. But I don't think we should put figures on that. I think it's important.
Why shouldn't we put figures?
But it's
on
important
that?
About getting the right people, isn't it? So this is what the new immigration policy proposes. That actually, if you are a skilled migrant coming in to work in the UK, if you bring kind of capital with you, or if you are in a position where you are filling a gap in a market where we have a shortage of staff, whether that's the NHS or whatever it may be,
you're a Brexit
welcome.
supporter. Do you not have with the pressures that you see in your own constituency? You don't have a figure that you'd like to be put on there. It isn't right to aim for tens of thousands.
I don't think there is a right figure. I think there will always be areas where we need workers. There will always be areas where we don't. I think actually they've not specified what the kind of wage limit will be. Although
no, apparently that's been also kicked out to consultation, whether there should be this cap of 30,000.
It's right that we talk about it. I think that's important, and
Haven't we done that for 2 years?
Well, yeah, but we should be talking about how we fill the skills gaps in certain sectors. Beyond that cap won't apply to those certain sectors. But then actually, if you're talking about how you benefit communities like mine and stop what is certainly felt for a lot of people like an undercutting of wages through low-paid work from EU migrants, actually it's important that you have that wage limit to prevent that from happening.
Stephen Kinnock for Labour, do you feel that losing a target then is a step forward in the right way?
I've always felt that an arbitrary target was the wrong way of looking at this. I think the key point here is the process for getting to the numbers that you need to have, and that should be done on a sector-by-sector basis. And it should be done on the basis of consultation between trade unions, government and businesses, where they actually feed in their skills profiles, they look at the economy, they look at projections of what they need going forward, and I think numbers should be set then on industry by industry basis, and so from the bottom up, not from the top down. So it's actually needs based. You could then have a system where the Home Secretary brings those numbers to Parliament for a totally transparent debate in Parliament, and we vote on it just as we do the Chancellor bringing the budget.
I don't think we want you to vote on anything else at the moment. Well, no, of course we do. I slightly jest, but people are hoping to move forward. This has been delayed, I should say, in itself of coming forward.
I think it's about transparency and it's about control. And if you're going to have trust in a system, transparency is the key to
So actually not an arbitrary
trust.
figure, but a figure that's been worked out. Is
Bottom up, worked out, sector by sector basis, and bringing trade unions into the game, which I know is anathema to this government, but actually would make us a much better and fairer country.
Vera, where do you stand on this target then?
Well, latest immigration figures, which were buried amongst all the Brexit news, actually show that immigration figures are up as usual. They continue to be up, except that migration from the European Union is now down and migration from outside the European Union is up. So that demonstrates quite clearly that migration is actually dictated by our economy and the jobs market rather than by any sort of ideological targets. And what people have been particularly concerned about when they were talking about immigration is undercutting of wages. Now, if we are now setting a sort of limit of wages, for example, then of course the expectation is that that is what is going to be paid. So anything over £30,000, and I'm sure that would be very welcome by everybody, that suddenly, our minimum wage rises about to that percent. But how are British businesses are going to cope with that? So it is about being realistic of what we can actually do with migration, and not that we need migration, that a lot of the workers who came in from the European Union are actually needed in the NHS, needed in our construction industry. We can try to replace them with British workers, and that is, of course, something that I would definitely support. Except we cannot attract enough people from this country to work in these sectors. And that is where the problem is, and that is why we are bringing people from outside the country into this country.
I think 30,000 feels very high as well. If you look
as
at what
annual salary.
A junior doctor makes 27,000. Now, who can tell me that a junior doctor isn't a skilled worker? If it's about skills.
And Ben, what do you make of that?
I would say 25,000, or I think 30,000 is a very high threshold.
So what Stephen said is kind of the plan, actually, in that they are going to go out and look at which sectors and which areas we need to not look at wage caps, where we actually do need people.
So why haven't they done it already?
Well, they're rolling out now. They've announced it today. But the reality is that if you're a junior doctor on 27 grand, quite clearly when we have that shortage of doctors and nurses, you are going to fall into a category that is, we have a skills shortage here, and the wage cap will not apply to that.
I suppose the feeling that I often get through coming on the text console, even if for people who voted to remain, is that when politics gets into the hands of the politicians, things get diluted or don't quite come out how people maybe had hoped. People who voted to leave, one of the key reasons for some of them was about the number of people coming to this country and putting those pressures on. You've now said sustainable numbers. They may not feel that is fair. They want to know actual numbers. Interestingly, from Stephen there, talking about the transparency may appeal. If we just go very briefly back to the Norway deal that you would favour, I did mention it very briefly there about it, in terms of ending freedom of movement, that wouldn't be, I know you've mentioned these articles, but that wouldn't be how it worked with that Norway deal. Could you understand why people would feel that would be a betrayal of Brexit if you pushed for that and were successful?
I think it would be something that we could do. If you look at Articles 112 and 113, 113 is about actually developing a long-term solution to the issue. You have to convene a conference with the European Commission and you work a way out. And I actually think this is part of the need for the whole European Union to rethink and re-engineer. When you look at the pressure that Chancellor Merkel is under from the AfD, Macron from the Front National, there needs to be a rethink on free movement of labour across the entire EU. By leaving the EU and going into this outer ring of closely associated countries, I think it could be a reset moment for the British relationship with the EU, but a reset moment for the entire EU, because, Macron and others have been talking for years now about a multi-speed Europe.
When I thought we were going to talk about the Norway deal, I didn't know it was going to end up on such an optimistic note there, which I can thank you for, because I've only got you for about another couple of minutes, and I can take it into Christmas chat, what is banned and what is allowed around your tables. Now, you are going to have a 17-day break, certainly from the Chamber. I'm sure you'll be doing work in that time. But Bren Bradley, are you allowed to talk about politics or Brexit with your family?
It's almost unavoidable, isn't it? And you see lots of people at Christmas time that you don't normally see, and they're all very conscious of, the work that I do. So they're all saying, tell me what's going on, tell me what's happening.
And what are you going to say? What's a short answer to that over an initial drink?
Go away.
Great.
My kids are 2 and 5. I'm quite looking forward to, playing a bit of Paw Patrol and not thinking about it, actually.
Okay, Stephen Kinnock, are you allowed to talk politics at the Christmas table, especially with who's in your family?
Yeah. It's sort of kind of unavoidable. No, the taboo subject at the dinner table for us is going to be the issue of tattoos, because my youngest daughter, who is 19, has just had her second tattoo.
Okay.
Let's just say that my dad is not a fan fan. So there's going to be a taboo on tattoos around my dinner table.
Are we allowed to know what the second tattoo was? Is it anything sort of offensive? Was it a butterfly?
It's a nice sort of picture of two kind of glasses chinking together in a sort of cheers. Well, whatever. Well, I'm not passing comment on it at all. I've decided to be Switzerland on this issue.
That's the most political you've been since you've been in here about the issue of family tattoos. Oh, lovely. Okay.
I have changed my mind on tattoos, actually. So there you go. I'm a
convert.
A convert.
Okay.
I think they can be very pretty and very good looking.
You need to get round to the Kinnocks and help.
Have a word with my dad.
Help out the chat round the table.
Absolutely, and it's okay to change your mind.
That's the Christmas message here on the panel. Vera, anything taboo around your table?
So my children had no chance but be very political from the age of 8. My youngest daughter, we were councillors. We were always not allowed to talk about the council. And we got very, very poor because we had a sort of limit of 50p at dinner. If we talked about the council, within 10 minutes we started talking about the council again. So they have given up. We will be talking about Brexit, but we are going to have friends from Berlin. And I think we are all going to reminisce about when the Berlin Wall came down, when we were all there in 1989. A great moment of hope and progress. And possibly we will then come back to the Brexit debate and how sad it is really that we seem to be going back from that moment of hope and progress and opening out to the world.
Ben Bradley's going to be celebrating. It's nearly here. 100 days.
I wasn't born when the Berlin came down.
Oh, thanks, Ben. That's really great. That's made us feel great.
Okay, well, you can all think about what tattoo you might or might not get then, with inspiring words here from our MPs. Thank you very much to our MPs panel, our last of this year. Ben Bradley, Stephen Kinnock, Vera Hobhouse. Thank you to you. Merry Christmas to all of you.
You too.
See you on the other side. Right.